Hi boys and girls, we are going to talk today about the ancient Roman system of government. Okay, so make sure you have your notes out and a pencil. You may want to write down everything that I write down because at the end you're going to have to go to a Google Doc and answer some questions. And these are going to be really good notes later for your test. We're going to take you back to 509 BC, okay? In 509 BC, the Romans overthrew their last and final king. Okay, so here's your king. Oh no! And they ousted him. You're out of here. He was an Etruscan king. He was very, very mean. He could make up whatever he wanted and make people do whatever he wanted, and they ousted him. And they created a republic. The first ones to create a republic, and that word is going to be very important. Now you may think of a republic like our government here in the United States, but it is very different. And we're going to talk about some of those similarities and differences later. So this republic that they formed, and we're going to talk about the different parts of it, lasted for the next 500 years. So we had a king first, and now we're having a republic for the next 500 years until it becomes the Roman Empire, and we have an emperor, and we're going to talk about that later. So this republic had 3 parts of government. Sound familiar? 3 parts of government. The first part ran the government. The second part made the laws. And the third were the judges. So here is our 3 parts of the government. So what we talk about from here on is going to be all about the Roman Republic. Now you may want to pause the video here so that you make sure you get all of your notes. I'm going to go ahead and erase, and we're going to go to the next section. Part 2. This part's a review. So yesterday you had a video, it went over the class system. So we're going to do a little mini review for the class system because it's going to be important for the Republic. Class system. Okay, at the top of the pyramid we have the patricians. And then we have the plebeians, the freemen, and the slaves. So what do we know about the patricians? They had lots of this. They were wealthy landowners. They came from the original tribes that founded Rome. So basically their children became the landowners, and then their children became the landowners, and it was all about the patricians. The next one is the plebeians. So they did have some money. We had our merchants and our traders. They had shops, shopkeepers. These are your ordinary people, ordinary citizens. Okay, both of these were citizens, the patricians and the plebeians. They were ordinary citizens. Now they served in the army. They made up the army, and they paid their taxes. Okay, these are the everyday people, the plebeians. Most of the people were plebeians. The patricians were a smaller class, but the most influential. Then we had our freemen, a little bit of money. Those are their slaves that earned their freedom. And then we have our slaves. So they had no money and no power and no rights. These were our prisoners of war. So we have most people here, but you're gonna find in the Republic, these people, the patricians, are the ones who wield the most power. So there's a review for the class system. If you wanna write this down and pause the video, you can here. I'm gonna go ahead and erase, and we're gonna go to the next section. So here's the Republic as it is set up. We have these head guys, okay? 2 guys. We'll get one curly hair, one straight hair. These 2 guys are the 2 leaders. They're called consuls. So we have 2 consuls. Remember that word consuls, that's gonna be important later. It was kind of like having 2 presidents. The good thing about having 2 consuls is that one consul is going to have veto power. And if you can remember what veto means, it actually means I forbid in Roman. So one could veto the other. And that was really important, because if this guy's trying to make a law or pass a law and this guy says no, veto, then it doesn't get done. So one could veto the other. Unlike a president, the consuls, the 2 consuls, are chosen every year. And this is very strategic because they didn't want anyone to get too much power. So if you were the head for a long time, you had a lot of power. But these people were chosen every year, different people. And they said they couldn't serve again for 10 years. Now later that got changed. These guys were technically the head of the army. They're military. And usually one of the guys would be here, one in the country, and the other one would lead the armies, one outside the country. So they could expand their territory, and we're going to talk more about that later. They both were in charge of the government, running the government. It was the head. You're the big kahuna. Okay, this one's super important. They're chosen after 1 year to not abuse power. All right, so we have our 2 consuls. The other part of the Republic was the Senate. And if that word sounds familiar to you, it is because we also have a Senate in the United States. This is our law-making body. Now, unlike the consuls, once you're elected to the Senate, you are elected and you serve for life. Your whole life, you are now part of the Senate. So they have senators who are like 30 years old all the way to very old men. Now these guys in the Senate, they propose the laws. They held debates to discuss something and to figure out which way they're going to go. And they approved building programs. And they did a lot of building of buildings and aqueducts and bridges and whatnot. So the Senate had around 300 members. But guess what? All of these senators, they were all patricians. Okay? All patricians. And if you remember, the patricians are the wealthy class. They are not the most, but they are the wealthiest, so they had the most power. So where are the plebeians? Where are they? How are they represented? Well, they weren't. And that's going to lead us to our next section. So go ahead and pause the video if you need to pause it here. I'm going to erase, and we're going to go on to the next section. Eraser's getting too dirty. It's good enough. All right, so in 494 BC, the plebeians decided they had had enough and they were going to go on strike. So the plebeians went on strike. Now, the plebeians did everything around the city. They're the ones who worked everywhere. They worked for the patricians. So if they left, who's going to do everything? They also refused to serve in the army. And they prepared to leave the city. And when they left the city, they were going to set up their own republic. So they had a plan. They were leaving. They were tired of this. And how do you think the patricians felt about this? Well, this is how they felt. Scared. So they decided, hey, where do you guys think you're going, right? We'll give you whatever you want. Just stay here. And they gave in. So what did the plebeians get? They made their own council called the Council of Plebes in 471 BC. Now this council, they elected tribunes or tribunes. Okay, those are their representatives. Remember, they were not seen in the Republic. They weren't part of the Senate or the consuls. So now they have their own guys, the tribunes. And the cool thing about the tribunes is they possessed veto power. So like the consuls, they also had veto power. So if they saw something that the Senate made and they didn't agree with it, they could veto it because of the Council of Plebes. There were so many more people. So now we have the two consuls and we have the Senate and we have the tribunes. All right, so we have the patricians and the plebeians here. Oops. E-I-A-N-S, plebeians. Okay, so as the time progresses, you're going to see the Republic shift and change. So this ends this section. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to, and we're going to sum up on our last section. Let's see if we can get this left. All right, so we're going to kind of go forward a little bit. So I'm going to write later. Years are passing and this is how things are changing. In 449 BC, we have the establishment of the 12 tables, okay? They kind of remind me of the tablets, or if you know the story of Moses, about those tablets. These are significant because they became the first written law. They were a list of rules. And you might say, didn't they have rules before? They did have rules, but they weren't written down, and they were kind of subject to whoever was doling out the consequences. So having it written down and keeping people accountable, whether they were patricians or plebeians, was very significant. They took those 12 tables or tablets and they displayed them in a public marketplace, or what they would call a forum, for everyone to see and everybody to read. This became the basis for all future Roman law. And this was significant because all free citizens were to be treated equally by the legal system. And it was there for all to see and read. Now later down the line, as things kind of started evening out, the patricians and plebeians, let's see if I can spell it right this time, could marry. So there wasn't such a stigma, one couldn't go to the other before, and now they can both marry. And then eventually, the plebeians could be elected to consul. And eventually one of them had to be consul. Since there was two, eventually they had to be. And you might think to yourself, wow, that's great. All that progress. When in actuality, so I'm going to write in actuality, actually, what really happened was the wealthy stayed in power. They still were making all of the decisions one way or another. They influenced the most people. And women still had no voice. The Republic was still very far from being a democracy, but it was the first step. So we learned all about the Republic, and some of these words are going to be important for your Google Doc today. So make sure you have all the notes written. If you need to go back and re-listen to any part of the video, please do so. If you are finished, then you can go to the Google Doc and fill out the answers there. Make sure you keep all your notes because this is going to be very important later on. And we will be talking about the next step in Rome's process.